rapidly changing. Sea ice extent is in decline in this region, and that has led to an opening of the widening rather of the open water season, which has extended around 13 days since the 1970s. And so this plot just kind of gives you an idea of how the minimum and maximum recorded in the past decade compares to that recorded in the 1970s and 80s. We also know that the sea surface temperatures are warming. The sea is getting warmer every year, it seems, and this is shown in this plot of the average sea surface temperature anomalies as compared for the August mean starting in 1982 onwards. And so you can see that the temperature, the trend overall is warming for this region. But yet, what we fully do not understand is how these widespread environmental changes are affecting each level of the food web in the Arctic marine ecosystem. So how will declining sea ice and warming sea temperatures affect these critters? So if you're going to study how the Chukchi Sea is changing during the summer months, it's helpful to study an animal that lives in the Chukchi Sea during the summer months. Enter in the fin whale. So fin whales are really fascinating creatures. They are the second largest organism on Earth, and that's after the blue whale, of course. They measure around 85 to 90 feet long. And they have this really interesting coloration in that they have what's called a chevron on their backs. I don't know if you can see it here. I'll get my laser pointer, but it kind of has the chevron pattern on its back. And then really interesting, on fin whales, the right jaw is white and the other side is a dark gray color. And then that's switched on the tongue. So the right side of their tongue is dark, and then on the left side of their tongue is white. And so it's not really clear why, but kind of if you see a fin whale and you're able to look at the jaw, you can immediately notice it's a fin whale just by that distinction alone. And so fin whales are considered to be a cosmopolitan species. And what that means is that they're found throughout the world's oceans, mostly in deep water, and they're most common in temperate waters, but they are found in polar seas as well. And so we don't really know where fin whales go to breed each winter. They don't really seem to have a central breeding location, but we do have an idea of where they go in the summer. And so this map here shows the summer range of the Northeast Pacific fin whale stock. And you can see that fin whales are seen in the Gulf of Alaska, Bering Sea, and Chukchi Sea every summer. So fin whales migrate to the Chukchi Sea each summer to feed on seasonally abundant prey. They are considered to be generalist predators, meaning they feed on a wider range of species than other animals do. And they feed mostly on schooling fish, krill, and copepods. And we know what they eat from stomach samples that were collected by Japanese whalers in the Bering Sea back in the 1950s and earlier. And so in the Bering Sea, the stomachs of the captured fin whales show that they eat capelin, Alaska pollock, Pacific herring, as well as Thysonessa euphausids or krill. And in the Chukchi Sea, they've been seen swimming amongst schools of Arctic cod and are thought to also eat Arctic krill as well. And so fin whales produce some of the lowest sounds on Earth. And due to the low frequency nature of these calls, these low calls can travel great distances underwater and are even thought to perhaps travel across ocean basins. And so the most commonly recorded sound that fin whales make are these short down sweeps called the 20 hertz pulse. And it's called the 20 hertz pulse because it centers around 20 hertz frequency, which just happens to be just out of the human hearing range. And we can, on a good day, humans can hear from 20 hertz to around 20,000 hertz. And in fact, when these calls were first recorded in the mid 20th century, they were actually thought to be the product of earthquakes or machinery far away, researchers thought they were far too low, far too mechanical sounding to actually be from a biological source. And it wasn't until these calls were recorded in the company of fin whales that the two were put together, and it was determined that, oh, this is a call by the fin whale. And so I'm going to play two samples for you. You can see here, this is what the call looks like, and this is called a spectrogram. So we use spectrograms as a quick way of studying calls because it's an easy way to see calls rather than having to listen to all the files. But we have frequency or pitch you can think of on the y-axis and time on the x-axis. And you can see that these calls are very short and center around 20 hertz. So I'm going to play the call for you in normal time, and you're going to hear two really low pulses. It'll happen around 2 seconds and then around 7 seconds. So let's see if we can get this to work. Let's see. Options. It's not working. That's okay. Darn. Okay, well, it's I'll see if I can get it to work maybe during the question section. But you can imagine it's barely outside of the human hearing range. And that's too bad that's not working, but.
This is Gay. I'd say that I got a little snippet of it beforehand, and it's like a low rumble.
Yes, yeah.
Kind of
exactly. Yeah, exactly.
Hopefully
like
get that fixed so everybody can hear it.
Yeah, I wonder if I can get out of the I'm going to try. Oh, okay. Hold on, guys. Yes.
All right.
Let's try this.
Fantastic.
Okay. All right, here we go. Okay.
I don't know could anyone, I don't know if anyone knows how to unmute or if you can chat, but was anyone able to actually hear those 3 calls? I could not, unfortunately. It was straight up static.
Yeah.
Yeah. It looks like people could not hear that either. I'm sorry, I don't know why.
Yeah.
We'll get to it again.
Yeah.
Thank you, everybody.
So we'll try so you may not have heard it because it might be just way outside of your range. I'm going to turn my volume up, and we'll play a second clip of it, but this time the sound clip has been sped up 10 times. And so maybe this time you'll be able to hear it. How about now?
Yes, it sounds like I can hear it now, and people are typing in the chat that they can hear it as well. So well done.
Okay.
Thank you.
Cool.
Very interesting.
Yeah. So it's really interesting that that's another reason why we use these spectrograms, is because if we tried to listen, it'd almost be impossible. So you really need these spectrograms in order to even see that fin whales are there and they're calling. So yes, very interesting calls. So these 20 hertz pulses are often emitted in patterned sequences, which form songs. And these songs can last anywhere from an hour to 33 hours long. And their songs are thought to be produced by males as a mating call. And so these mating calls are typically heard in fall through spring, which is thought to be when the breeding season is. And so fin whales are by no means new to the Pacific Arctic. They were a common sight in the southern Chukchi Sea, typically just north of the Chukotka coast in Russia, anywhere from July through October. And the Soviet researcher Sleptsov described fin whales as being one of the most numerous baleen whales that inhabited the Chukchi Sea. And he reported seeing hundreds of fin whales in the span of 6 days between the Bering Strait and Cape Sirtes Common, which I have marked here on the map. However, industrial whaling in the 20th century really took a hit on fin whale populations worldwide. And in particular, in the North Pacific, Soviet whalers targeted fin whales because of their large size and hunted them near to the brink of extinction. And sightings of fin whales became rare in the Chukchi Sea after the 1970s. And so these are some really cool photos, all taken by a researcher named Berzin. And this photo is kind of neat because you can see the underside of the fin whale here, and you can see that really distinct pattern of white and black, like a black dark gray on the other side. And this is one of the Soviet whaling ships that operated in the region in the 1930s through the 1960s. And so fin whales are now considered to be endangered. However, thanks to protections, fin whales are making a comeback and are now regularly seen in the Chukchi Sea, particularly the southern Chukchi Sea. However, recent aerial and acoustic surveys in this region have noticed that fin whales seem to be there in some years and not in others. Well, interestingly, this observation is not new. If we remember our friend Sleptsov, back in 1961, he observed that fin whale numbers seem to vary year by year due to changing ice conditions and the quantity of zooplankton. So thus it's been hypothesized that perhaps the variation in the presence of these animals is due to changes in the environment. And so this is kind of where I come in. So that really sparks my curiosity, and I wanted to know why. So we know that fin whales are seen in the Chukchi Sea in summer with some year-to-year variability. But what we don't know is what draws fin whales into the Chukchi Sea in some years and not in others. And so this really forms the motivation of this research. And so if variability in fin whales is due to environmental variability, then what causes environmental variability in the Chukchi Sea? Well, one answer might be the presence of distinct water masses. And you could think of these water masses as currents, similar to like the Gulf Stream. And these water masses are distinguished by different temperature and salinity properties. So we'll start with, there are 3 major water masses in the Chukchi Sea region. We'll start with the westernmost water mass, and that's the anadir water, symbolized by this blue line here. And so the anadir water is very cold and salty. And because it's salty, it tends to be nutrient rich. And then because it's nutrient rich, it tends to have larger plankton, zooplankton and phytoplankton. And so this is considered to be the most productive water mass of the region. And then moving to the center of the Bering Strait, we have the Bering Shelf water. And this too is a cold and salty, though not as salty as the anadir water. And it's also nutrient rich and thus tends to have larger plankton associated with it. And then on the eastern side of the strait, we have the Alaskan coastal water. And this is a seasonal water mass, and it tends to be warmer and fresher due to a lot of river inputs, including the Yukon River, which just dumps warm and fresh water into this water mass each year. And because it's warmer, it tends to have smaller plankton. And so what's interesting about these 3 water masses is they kind of create a gradient of productivity across the Bering Strait. And the movement of these water masses contributes to varying environmental conditions in the region. And I'll show you an example of how that's just so. And so this is a map of temperatures near the surface and taken in August and September, comparing between 2012 and 2013. And here you can see, we have our water mass key up here. You can see the warm signal here from the Alaskan coastal water. And so this is considered to be a very normal looking year in terms of the Alaska coastal water and distribution of temperatures. But if we look at 2013, it's very different. And so it is thought that perhaps in 2013, a portion of the Alaskan coastal water was shut down, possibly due to persistent southward winds. And so this created very different temperature regimes depending on where you are in the Chukchi Sea, as well as the Bering Strait. And so it also illustrates just how environmental conditions can change year by year and over space as well. And so for this study, we used data from 3 oceanographic moorings positioned within the Bering Strait. And these are Rebecca Woodgate's moorings that she's been servicing every year since the 1990s, I believe. And so the purpose of these moorings they were positioned specifically to measure these water masses. And so starting with our northernmost site, A3 measures kind of the confluence between the Anadyr water and the Bering Shelf water. And then site A2 was positioned mostly to sample the Bering Shelf water, though it sometimes captures the Anadyr water as well. And then A4 is positioned right on top of the Alaska coastal water. So that tends to sample that water mass primarily. And so we collected data during the open water period, which we defined as July through November, and we had around 7 years of data. And so this map shows you, kind of gives a nice example of, again, how you can have these gradients of temperature across the southern Chukchi Sea and Bering Strait. And so this is a map of sea surface temperatures taken on August 26th in 2004. And again, you can see this really warm Alaska coastal water kind of trickling along it flows northward along the Alaskan coast, and that's captured by A4. Whereas A2 tends to get kind of the median, and then A3 tends to get sometimes the Alaskan coastal water, but mostly the Anadyr and Bering Shelf water coming through. Just to note that A3 prime is a historic site and is no longer in commission. And so because we have these really productive water masses, namely the Bering Shelf and Anadyr waters, we thought that, well, these are the most productive areas, so that's probably where we would find fin whales. And so we hypothesized that fin whales would be in those areas in those years when those 2 water masses were present. And that would be indicated by cold temperatures and high salinities. And then we were also curious to look at what could be signaling the fin whales to leave the Chukchi Sea every year. And we thought that perhaps how long fin whales stay in the Bering Strait and southern Chukchi Sea depends on sea ice, and that years with later sea ice would have later fin whale departure dates, because why leave if the sea ice isn't there? And so this is a cartoon of what one of our moorings looks like. The area in which these moorings are deployed ranges from 40 to 50 meters depth. And so we use temperature and salinity data to determine which water masses were present each day using published definitions from a paper by Seth Danielson. And so at around 16 meters depth, we have our near surface temperature and salinity sensor, nicknamed the ISCAT. And you can see it here in this image. So this measures temperature and salinity near the surface. And then at around 40 meters depth, we have our near bottom temperature and salinity sensor, nicknamed the Seabird. And you can see it here in this picture, covered in barnacles and all kinds of critters. And then at around 6 meters from the seafloor are our hydrophone, or our underwater microphones. And so these, and here's a picture of it here. It's fairly large. I want to say it's probably like 1.5 meters long. And it's so big because it has to have 2 really big, powerful batteries inside of it to power it all year long. And so the way these hydrophones work is that we've programmed them to turn on at the start of each hour, and they record 10 to 20 minutes each hour, turn off, and wait for the next hour to come. And this what we call duty cycling, allows us to have year-long deployments and be able to study this region all year long. And so then we quantified fin whale acoustic presence as the number of hours per day with fin whale calls, which I'll call fin whale hours going forward. And then for our sea ice data, we used a suite of different satellite-derived products to cover the whole duration of the study. Okay, on to the exciting part. So the fin whale detections. So on the top right, we have our map of the mooring locations, just to kind of remind you of where everything is. And then I'll show you a bar plot of the sum of fin whale hours for each October. So the grand total of hours that had calling fin whales for October of each year. And why we chose October is that October had the highest acoustic occurrence of fin whale hours across all sites. It had around 68% of all fin whale hours occurred in October. So that's when fin whales are there and they're calling. And so immediately your eyes can tell you that A3 was very different. A3 is where the party is at if you're a fin whale. So about a third of all total recording days, so days that the hydrophones were on, had fin whale calls present with at least one fin whale call, compared to only 4.6% at A2 here, and then only 1.5% of days had fin whale calls present at A4. So A3 really is where the story is. And so our original question was, okay, now that we have we have a spatial difference, like it seems to be that A3 has most of the fin whale calls. What about interannual variability? So we'll focus on the two highest fin whale years, 2012 and 2015. And we'll see if perhaps these 2 years have some unifying characteristics that could explain what draws fin whales into the Chukchi Sea. And so we'll start with the temperature and salinity means for October, again, at this site A3. And I'll show you a series of 4 plots. So on the left-hand side, we'll have our temperature. On the right-hand side will be our October average salinity. And then this top row is the near surface temperatures measured by our near surface sensor. And then the bottom row are our near bottom temperatures and salinities. And so I'll show you the mean temperatures overlaid with that same bar plot that I showed you in the previous slide of the sum of fin whale hours, just so you can remind yourself what years had the most fin whales. And so what I want to draw your attention to immediately is the difference between 2012 and 2015. 2012 was on average colder in the near surface than it was in 2015. And this relationship holds for the near bottom sensor as well. So 2012 was interestingly a colder year at A3 than 2015. In fact, it was the coldest out of all 7 years. Similarly, the 2 years differed in salinity as well. 2012 was a markedly fresher year than 2015. 2015 had average or slightly high salinities measured at A3. And again, this relationship holds for the near bottom sensor as well. So unfortunately, there's not any unifying theme here between the 2 years. So what about water mass? Like, water mass is really what our main hypothesis, as you will recall. So again, I have our key for the water mass, the 3 dominant water masses, and I'll show you the water mass present using a temperature and salinity plot. And so these are kind of, they seem more difficult than they really are, but we have temperature on the y-axis here and salinity on the x-axis. And again, this is all for October, the daily means of each. And then each of these boxes represents the water mass. So if a point falls within this box, it means that that day had the lowest Alaskan coastal water present. If a point falls within this box, it means that the Bering Chukchi summer water was present. And so the paper that we use for our temperature and salinity definitions for water masses combine the Anadyr water and Bering Shelf water into this water mass. That's the reasoning was that they tend not to be that different from year to year, so they just figured that we could put them all together in one water mass. And then another water mass to note is the meltwater. And we didn't really talk about this before, but this is a water mass that's formed by melted sea ice. It's thought, and that's they can tell that because it's a typically fresher, colder water masses than the other water masses present. And then lastly, each point will be symbolized based on whether or not fin whales were present. So a filled in icon is when fin whales were present, whereas a hollow one is when they were not present. And then the different shapes are for what sensor that data came from. And so I'll show you 2015 first. And 2015 was pretty much what we hypothesized. You can see here that every icon seems to be filled in. So pretty much every day in October of 2015 had calling fin whales present. And they all fall within this Bering Chukchi summer water, which is, again, the combination of our two most productive water masses. So if we just had 2015, case solved. We have our hypothesis. It supports our hypothesis. But then comes 2012, ruining our hypothesis. And so you can see here that, again, most of the points do fall within this water mass here, the Bering Chukchi summer water. But there were a few days where meltwater was present and fin whales were also present. So our thought that the fin whales are only present when the Anadyr water and Bering Shelf water are there does not hold. But it's important to remember that these 2 years were high fin whale years. So not quite a smoking gun as we had hoped. So what about fin whale departure dates? Remember, we hypothesized that perhaps when fin whales leave the Bering Strait is connected to sea ice. Well, I'll show you a plot here. Here we have day of the year on the y-axis and year on the x-axis. And this gray line here is when sea ice, or when the Bering Strait region began to freeze up. And then the red and blue lines are the date when the surface and bottom temperature sensors reached freezing or below. And then this teal line is when the date that the last fin whale call were heard for the year. And so if fin whale departure dates depended or were correlated with the date that the study area froze up, the lines would be very parallel. But if you see here that 2010 had the latest freeze up date for the study area, but it had the earliest fin whale departure date. So again, this relationship doesn't hold, and we didn't find any correlation between fin whale departure date and freeze up date for the study area. And it's worthwhile to note that we also, we fit a line to this, and we found a weekly positive but insignificant trend in fin whale departure dates. So it seems like the fin whale departure date is getting later over time, but we don't really have enough data to prove that, and the relationship isn't significant statistically. Okay, so through all of that, what do we know now about fin whales in the Chukchi Sea? Well, we know that, again, the acoustic presence of fin whales seemed to vary year by year through 2009, 2015. But unfortunately, the causes of the variability are still unclear. And then we also discovered that fin whales seem to leave the southern Chukchi Sea in early November, so definitely later than the historical records, which showed them leaving in October. But what signals fin whales to leave the region remains unclear. So I want to offer some possible explanations for our observed patterns. The first that perhaps the pattern of interannual variability could be connected to variability elsewhere in the fin whale range. Keep in mind that these animals have to swim long distances and through the Bering Sea before they get to the Bering Strait. So maybe they're picking up on environmental clues in the Bering Sea before they make the decision to continue north to the Chukchi Sea. Also, variation could be due to a combination of environmental factors rather than temperature and salinity on its own or water mass on its own. Perhaps fin whales are cluing into a whole suite of clues to decide where they feed each summer, or perhaps there are factors that we did not examine, including perhaps there is some kind of cyclical pattern to when fin whales visit each of their summer feeding grounds. And so we really need more data to be able to tease apart that pattern. But one interesting thought that I had is that though both 2012 and 2015 had high fin whale occurrence, they had very different environmental conditions. And so these 2 years could potentially present contrasting push and pull factors. And I'll explain what I mean. So in 2012, we measured cooler temperatures in the Bering Strait, and cooler temperatures may have created favorable feeding conditions in the southern Chukchi Sea, thereby pulling fin whales into the area. So colder temperatures have been found to lead to better growth and survival amongst Calanus copepods. And Calanus copepods are an important component of the Chukchi Sea zooplankton community. So perhaps this led to better feeding opportunities for fin whales and thus more fin whales. And this is kind of supported by observations in the Bering Sea where more fin whales were observed in colder years than in comparatively warmer years. So that's perhaps what was going on in 2012. But for 2015, perhaps poor conditions elsewhere in the North Pacific may have pushed fin whales into the southern Chukchi Sea in search of food. So as you're probably well aware, a normally warm water mass nicknamed the blob pervaded the Pacific in 2015. And this led to a whole series of drastic changes in the North Pacific, declines in krill, unknown mortality events of seabirds, as well as distribution shifts for some marine species. And it was a bad year for fin whales too. A dozen fin whales stranded in the Gulf of Alaska in May through June 2015. And although the cause of death was unknown, it's assumed to be ecologically related, and it's thought that perhaps these fin whales starved. And so all science comes with caveats, and I must disclose the caveats of this study. So the 20 hertz pulses are thought to be produced by males as a mating call. And so perhaps the reason why we saw so many fin whale calls in October is because October is close to the winter breeding season. And perhaps that's when fin whales are starting to rev up their songs to attract their mates. And so the timing might be kind of biased towards the breeding season. Also, the Achilles heel of acoustics is that we're only able to study calling whales. If the whales are silent, we don't know that they're there. In our case, because we were studying the 20 hertz pulse, we were only able to detect calling males. And so we could only detect the presence of half the population using acoustics alone. However, that is still significant. We've gone from knowing very little about fin whales to knowing that, oh, there is this pattern of intervariability, and it has continued for decades now. Also, for future directions, I think where you sample really matters. And I'll return to this plot that I showed you before. So if you were to sample in the area just north of the Bering Strait in 2012, illustrated by this complete circle, you would think that 2013 was a warmer year than 2012. In fact, that could have happened with our study. And whereas if you were only sampling in the area just north of Wainwright, presented by this dash circle, you would think that 2013 was a cooler year than 2012. Not to mention that there's an entire half of the Chukchi Sea and Bering Sea, which remains a complete mystery. And so where you measure your environmental variables matters. And also, I think it's important that we keep in mind that this was historically where most fin whales were observed. So not having this piece of the puzzle is kind of a big gap in our knowledge about fin whales in the Chukchi Sea. And so I think that future studies should examine the Pacific Arctic as a whole, rather than trying to explain variation using data from one region alone. And so what about other subarctic whales? Like, fin whales are not the only subarctic baleen whale that comes into the Chukchi Sea seasonally each year. So my next adventure in science will be looking at humpback whales and gray whales, as well as in comparison to fin whales, and seeing if perhaps these two species also have similar patterns of inter-annum variability, and perhaps that could be explained by environmental variation as well. So with that, I want to thank you all for joining me. I have to, of course, thank my advisors and co-authors and my funders that made this research possible. I was only able to go through just a portion of the story. And so if you're interested in reading more, I just published these results in the Deep Sea Research Part 2. And I have my contact information up there. And I can also have Gay forward it to you as well. If you're interested, I can send you a PDF copy. And I'll take any questions if you have them.
All right. Thank you very much, Erica. I've sort of lost myself here on this Zoom thing, but that's okay. Thank you very much. That was really great. And we do have some poll questions. I don't know if you want to do those first.
Sure.
Okay. So for this, I don't know if you're familiar with Zoom, but on the bottom, I'm going to launch a poll, and you should be able to click on the answer that you would like. And so there's about 13 of us here, 12 or 13. Did you know did you know fin whales travel north through the Bering Strait? I would have to say I've heard about it, but I pretty much didn't have a clue. All right, now I'm gonna close this. It looks like, here we go, and share results. So most people, interestingly, did not know fin whales travel north through the Bering Strait, which is, I have to agree, to think of we have an 80-foot whale going through the Bering Strait that dwarfs a bowhead, you know, I have to wrap my head around that. So that's very interesting right there. And then we've got another question. Let's see. Continue. Book. Nope. Hang on. Yes. Let me get to the oh, I see how this works. Okay, excuse me there. Launch. This is, have you ever seen fin whales in the Bering Strait region? And we have some really fantastic observers in the Bering Strait region, in Nome and other places. And I would have to go with whoever said only in my dreams. That if I could vote, which I can't on this one from my position, I would have put that one down. So that I'm going to end the polling, and nobody has seen a fin whale in the Bering Strait region. So bear with me. We have one more question. All right. And this is, did you learn something new tonight that changed how you think about fin whales or the Bering Strait? Click on one that might answer your, I'm waiting on one or two. There's one more. 3, 2, all right, 1, here we go. End polling. And there we go. So very nicely done. It was a beautiful presentation as well, I have to say, Erica, and thank you for putting up with our technical glitches as well. Does anyone have any questions for Erica? There's the chat box if you don't want to voice up.
Hey there, this is Vince Villela from Nome. And I'm just curious, why does the water on the westernmost section of the Bering Strait, even though it's colder, why is it more nutrient rich?
That's a good question.
I can help you on that one, Erica.
Yes, yeah, I'll do the phone a friend option.
A lifeline. It's a lifeline
A
back to know.
lifeline.
So the ocean has, I don't know if you remember back in school, or maybe they didn't teach this, I'm older than dirt, but there's a conveyor belt of currents. So there are currents that are moving slowly all over the ocean, right? The Gulf Stream, and that bumps into something else. And it's a giant interconnected river of currents around the globe. The water that is in the western portion of the Bering Sea is some of the oldest water that hasn't surfaced. It's been going around underneath, and it's been under there for probably 1,000 or more years. And it has been absorbing nutrients the entire time. So all the things that are depleted out of the water when living organisms are eating and gobbling and breathing it all, this water's been slowly circulating in the deepest places. When by the time its turn comes to come up into the Western Bering Sea, it is extremely rich, nutrient-rich water. When it comes up into the Northern Bering Sea, the Bering Strait region, it is all of a sudden gone very shallow, and the sunlight is magnificent to it. It is like kaboom, and you will have a fantastic algae production, which then in turn creates incredible zooplankton that want to eat the algae, and then here we go, all the animals that eat the zooplankton, including this incredibly large fin whale, which I actually skipped the part. What is the fin whale's diet, main diet?
Mostly krill, it's lot, but they also eat schooling fish, like small fish as well.
Okay, thank you. Vince, does that answer your question about the richness of the water?
Yeah, thank you. That was a great answer.
Agreed.
It's a duo. It's a team effort here.
That's right.
Anyone else have a question for Erica? So here's my question. University of Washington, I assume you're working with NOAA, Alaska Fisheries Science Center down there in the Seattle area that does a lot of the whale research?
Actually, no, but like they're kind of like, yeah, there's so many tangential parallel efforts going on.
Gosh, okay.
I would love, yeah, like I would love to join forces. But
well, I think there must be room for that, because seeing that most of the whales are in that sort of sidling towards Chukotka and the historical information about North Shore of Chukotka, I was going to say certainly I would hope that NOAA would be able to be able to help you integrate into some of that dialogue with our neighbors. So.
Yeah, that would be very cool too. I mean, like I said, that is just, it's almost like, yeah, we just have no idea what's going on. Like maybe sometimes we can detect if the Siberian coastal current is up and running, but other than that, we can't really, yeah, it's kind of a mystery. Besides, we can look at maps of sea surface temperature, of course, using satellite products, but sea surface temperatures really don't tell the whole story of what's going on below the surface. And so,
right.
Yeah.
You have a question in the chat box. I've noticed a picture of a jumping fin whale. That was a beautiful photo. Do they jump like the bowhead?
I'm glad that you noticed that. I have that in there just because I want, typically there's a tradition that you end with a picture of the baby, the baby form or whatever you're talking about, but like baby fin, I haven't found a good picture of a baby fin whale, but I did see that picture. I was absolutely amazed. It's the only picture I've ever seen and evidence that yes, fin whales do breach, but I don't think they breach very often. It's a big, heavy whale, and it probably took a lot of energy to do that. So yeah, good question. I'm glad that someone noticed that.
You have another question. How prevalent is hunting of fin whales?
Yes, good question. So
you might want to preface commercial versus subsistence, because we have both kinds here of hunting efforts, not on fin whales. But
yeah. So fin whales have been internationally protected by the moratorium on whaling, commercial whaling. However, Iceland's, Norway, I don't think Japan takes many fin whales, but I know that Iceland has been taking fin whales up until recently. They didn't whale this year. I don't believe they whaled last year. So they stepped away from the moratorium and have been conducting commercial operations up until recently. So that's some good news there. Fin whales are taken as part of the Greenland subsistence hunt. I remember looking up the numbers, and it's less than 5 fin whales a year, I believe, are taken. So, I mean, you can imagine catching one of these whales would provide a lot of food for a good long time. So, but yeah, it's not very prevalent, and these animals are still recovering and considered to be endangered. So it's very heavily regulated.
Any other questions for Erica? I have another one for you. Anybody else in the chat box? Don't fin whales sink when they are killed?
Yes.
That's a good question. They don't have much blubber, it doesn't look like.
Yeah, well, that was kind of that was a big part. That and their speed was a big part of why these whales weren't hunted successfully until the invention of mechanized harpoons back at the turn of the 1900s. They do sink, and so I'm not as familiar with the current methods of taking these whales and what's all involved. But yes, yeah, they do sink. They're not like bowheads and right whales that I believe float. And then I see a lifespan of fin whales. So fin whales are a very long-lived species. They're not as long-lived as bowheads. Bowheads still take the cake on that one. They can live up to 90 years old. They're kind of on a similar timeline as humans almost, that they come to sexual maturity around like age 12, 15, and then they breed. I'm not sure if it's known whether or not they kind of undergo menopause, similar to killer whales, but they can have a calf every 1 to 3 years. I think probably 3 years is the average reproductive cycle for fin whales. Is it possible to tag and track them to see where they go in summer? Yes, it is definitely possible. I know of some tagging efforts done off the coast of California. I believe perhaps off of Antarctica, but there haven't been any successful tag deployments in the Pacific Arctic that I know of. So yeah, good question. That would be awesome if we could put a tag on some of these Bering Strait fin whales. I would love to know where they go.
Fantastic. My question, my probably last question for you in this is, although we're not done, we can, 1 or 2 more questions are possible. You mentioned that 2012 and 2015, very different, right? There was something there that the whales, you said the push and the pull of it's not water current, it wasn't the temperature, what was it? We have a massive transition going on ecologically and industrially as well in the Bering Strait region, both in the northern Bering Sea and the Chukchi Sea. With the loss of the thermal barrier, we're having a big shift. Unfortunately, in 2012 and 2015, we had a gap actually between 2010 to 2017 from when the bottom trawl fish surveys were here, which are very helpful to us. So we don't really have a good comprehensive. But are you aware of any kind of, or have you looked at the Russians industrial, they've been trying to develop that region for oil and gas, for maritime. There's also been in that time frame, 12 through 15, we had some, I believe, oil and gas development going on up in the Chukchi Sea. Is that any of those kind of sounds of associated with those industries or with ship traffic or the ecological shift, any of that you're able to grasp? I know that the data are probably very difficult to find.
Yeah, it's too bad about the as you said, groundfish surveys. Yeah, or the bottom trawling. Yeah, that's too bad. I know that there have been papers put out by the DBO folks, the Distributed Biological Observatory group, kind of comparing 2012 and 2013. I showed you a plot from a paper from that effort, and I'm still waiting for them to look at 2015. I'm hoping that people who know a lot more about the intimate details about physical oceanography can make that comparison for me, and then I'll jump in and say, like, did you know that fin whales? So, but yeah, I'm not aware of the Russian oil development in that area. So that's really interesting to hear
They've
about.
been exploratory.
Exploratory. And is it in the northeast Chukchi Sea?
It's in the northwest Chukchi Sea.
No, northwest, so towards Wrangel Island, kind of, or
Between the border and Wrangel, yeah, it's in that, just pretty much. Yeah, I'll talk to you. I'll give you some.
yes, yeah,
Yeah.
I'd love to hear about it.
It's-
Yeah. So we don't know baleen. We don't really know what baleen whales here. We know much more about pinnipeds, seals, dolphins, toothed whales because we've had them in captivity, but it's fairly safe to perhaps make the assumption that if they're making calls in a particular pitch, that they'll be able to hear that pitch. Seems pretty reasonable. So ship noise, all ship noise, depending on the size of the vessel, seems to be right in the presumed hearing range of baleen whales. And so definitely, like, I know of previous studies, in fact, bowhead whales, with the oil development, active oil equipment will swim around and kind of go out of their way to avoid that noise. But I know also seismic exploration in the Mediterranean has chased fin whales out of the Mediterranean. And it took them a few seasons to come back to that area. So there is evidence that certain underwater anthropogenic noise does bother baleen whales. But it'll be interesting to see, because with the Bering Strait region, you have ships that are in transit, and so perhaps that noise will be annoying, but it won't hang around for very long. So what kind of effects that will have. Also, the fact that it's a very shallow area and that the most of the substrate tends to be very muddy, that too will have an effect on how sound is perceived in the region. So it'll be really interesting. I know there's a lot of interest in ship and noise in this region, and it'll be interesting to see the studies that kind of unlock some of those answers.
All right. Anyone else? We should probably let Erica take the rest of the night off pretty soon, but I am just so thankful that you took the time to spend your part of the evening tonight with us.